Others would argue that this kind of an argument is just, it's called the anthropomorphic argument. And of course their argument is, in a very flippant way, well, if we were not this way, we would not be here to know it. But I think that's a poor argument, because typically the naturalistic way of thinking is all about, do you leave enough offspring? Well, cockroaches and bacteria are very good at leaving offspring, and they live in the same world that we live in. So why was there a need, if we have organisms and bacteria for, let's say, 3.5 billion years, why was there a need to develop any other form of life if the criteria for success was just leaving offspring? Why are we here? Why aren't we cockroaches? Why aren't we still bacteria, according to the naturalistic way of thinking? Who are we? We are individuals that are constructed of dead chemicals. We're composite beings. We are made. Life is made of dead chemicals. And typically, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, these chemicals, these compounds, these atoms, come together in various large molecules. And yet all of these are dead chemicals. But when they come together to form life, some people believe that that is an emergent property of life. That is, it has to be, if you mix these chemicals, it has to be a living thing. The problem is that's not what happens. If you randomly mix these chemicals, they don't become alive. Life is different than any of its parts. The sum of these parts are different than their components. We think of ourselves as being a body and a soul, or a non-material part inside of a material part. Our life depends upon these chemicals, but our life is not synonymous with these chemicals. And only God can create life from non-life. We haven't been able to do it. We can mix these chemicals. We can start out with cell membranes and try to put these chemicals in. We can never make a living cell. Only God can create life from non-life. And we are dependent life. We've seen in the example that we depend on air, we depend on gravity, we depend on food, we depend on energy sources. We're dependent upon all these things, even though we didn't create them. We consume food, oxygen, water in a gravity field. This interesting photo on the top is all vegetables made into a face. And then, of course, the bottom is the cow. Plants and animals. We are dependent, absolutely, on things outside of ourselves. And that really, philosophically, should give you pause. Why is that the case? And within our environment, within the world, we neither create, design, nor sustain what exists. We simply are. Yeah, we build buildings. Yes, we have children. But when it comes to the real biological world, we didn't design it. We don't design new entities, although there are some recombinant life forms that we can create in the laboratory. But we didn't create it originally. We don't sustain it day by day. And I think these are deep, fundamental questions that ought to give you pause as to who are we really? Are we just cause and effect systems of atoms that came from nothing and nowhere and are going nowhere and have no purpose? Or is there a different system, a different explanation as to why we're here and how we function? If we look at the simplest form of life, it's a simple cell, and of course, there is no such thing as a simple cell because life has complex needs and intricate structure. The first thing that you notice about a cell is that it has a boundary layer. In this case, it's a fat layer, layer around the outside cell. It creates an identity within the cell that says that what is inside is self and what is outside is non-self. If that cell membrane breaks, the cell dies. But I can make a cell membrane and not have a living cell. It needs more than just the membrane. It needs information. And so within the nucleus of the cell is all of this information, all of these coded thoughts about how to run the cell, how to make the cell, how to repair the cell, how to make another cell. And that is encoded on these chemicals that are themselves dead, but again carry information. They carry the instructions of life. There's fuel metabolism that happens in these little structures called mitochondria, right? Little powerhouses of the cell that take in the carbohydrate fuels and change them into ATP energy. And that then is distributed around the cell so the cell can continue to be functional. There are metabolic motors that move parts of the cell around, that replicate the cell. Many cells are dependent upon oxygen, although some are not. Some are anaerobic organisms. But oxygen is a key efficiency driver for making possible cells to create lots of energy to do lots of replication. Of course, this happens in a water system, either internally or externally. And the cell has to be in the right temperature range, the right pH, the right acidity range, the right osmotic balance. Otherwise, it dies. Take away one of these factors, rupture the cell membrane, take away the nucleus. Your red blood cells do not have a cell nucleus. In fact, the cell nucleus is ejected after the red blood cell becomes a mature cell. And what that does is it limits the life of your red blood cells to a few days, really. I mean, there's a significant number of days, but it's not years. And so without the cell nucleus telling the cell how to repair itself, the cell dies. Without fuel, the cell dies. Without metabolic motors, the cell is paralyzed. Without water, there is no life. And without the right temperature for catalytic enzymes and chemistry to work, nothing works. So even simple life has complex needs. Take away one of those factors, life isn't possible.